how development incentives play a role in the growth of our general fund. So when I started this job in 2014, we had a $0.995 billion general fund, $995 million. Now we have a $1.395 billion general fund, $1.395 billion general fund. That's a growth of 40%. And so that's huge. And when you talk about growth of your general fund, that's your parks. So that's the new gymnasium that you see here at Farwell. That's the new equipment. That's more police officers. That's better lighting. That's better services. That's how we pay for those items. And that's why I like to let people know why development incentives are so important, how they actually work. All right, so thank you all for coming. My name is Councilman Scott Benson. I represent Detroit's 3rd District, and I am a big advocate of development and facts. And so what we've done is ensure that we are educating people on how tax incentives work, because there's lots of talk about how they work, what they do, what they don't do, and a lot of misinformation. Imagine that. So what we've done, this is the second time we've done this in the 3rd District. So we've asked DEGC, who are responsible for shepherding our projects through the process when it comes to development incentives, and they are here today to make a presentation. This is their second time doing this. So I just wanted to make sure every couple years we reinforce what goes on, how this works, how the dollars flow, how many checks we cut over to Dan Gilbert. How many checks do we cut to Dan Gilbert? None, that's what I thought. How many checks do we cut to Dan Gilbert? And we talk about that and how development incentives play a role in the growth of our general fund. So when I started this job in 2014, we had a $0.995 billion general fund, $995 million. Now we have a $1.395 billion general fund, $1.395 million general fund. That's a growth of 40%. And so that's huge. And when you talk about growth of your general fund, that's your parks. So that's the new gymnasium that you see here at Farwell. That's the new equipment. That's more police officers. That's better lighting. That's better services. That's how we pay for those items. And that's why I like to let people know why development incentives are so important, how they actually work, and how they benefit people who want to invest in the city of Detroit. And how many developers or potential developers do we have in here today? Right on. So you are our general audience. We want you to understand how these tools work, how they work for our smaller developments, all the way up to our mega developments, and how we get you to grow from the smaller development, medium-sized development, into a large development. Because you are how we grow our general fund. You are how we put people to work. You are how we provide services for our residents. And so we've got people here from DEGC. We've got the Board of Review here who helps keep people in their homes. We've got former Board of Review members who help keep people in their homes. We've got block club presidents and community leaders. And we have myself and my team, and we're ready to go. So who do we have next? Oh, rules of the road. So typically, and I know development, boy, it is a very passionate topic. And we get people want to yell and argue and fight. That's not what we're here for today. We're here to educate and provide facts. So number one, there will be an opportunity for question and answers. Casey, is that accurate? Yes. The Q&A period will come when? At the end. Okay, and so here's the other part. And so we need people to be respectful of people when they're speaking. Let one person speak. If you have a question, which will be at the end, we will take questions. We want to make sure everybody's questions get answered. And so we can stay until 7 o'clock when we got to get out. But in the meantime, we'll take those questions. And so what I need people to do is be respectful of other people's time when other people are talking, and we're going to answer every question. But what we're not going to do is debate. And we're not going to debate state law. We don't have any state lawmakers here today. The governor's not here to sign a new law if you need it. But what we are going to do is talk about the facts. And we're going to be respectful of other people's time. No matter who's talking about what the question, we're going to be respectful of the time, we're going to answer that question. Can we abide by those rules of the road? I can. Sign of hands, can we abide by those rules of the road? Who can't abide by those rules of the road? So making sure we see that. Everybody's in the community, they can abide by the rules of the road and be respectful of this scenario and where we are right now. If that's the case, let's go. Let's get some information out here and let's get the facts.
My name's David Howell, and I am the Vice President of Real Estate Services for DEGC, and I got the privilege of serving the citizens of Detroit. I've been with DEGC since the latter part of 2020, and actually it's my second tour of duty. I was there in 15, 16, left. I went to work for Midtown Detroit Inc., and I did some consulting and missed it so much, I found my way back. And so today, I just want to acknowledge Derek. Thank you. You know, it has been like a pleasure and an honor to be working side by side. We've been working side by side for a while in your capacity at LPD, but it's just lovely to have you on our side. And today we're going to talk about tax abatements. And actually, Councilman Benson, he started this. Like, he came to DEGC a couple of years ago and said, you guys need to take the information that you provide to council to the neighborhoods. And so we've been doing this for a couple of years, and it's yielded a lot of tremendous benefit. So what I'm gonna do now is introduce who you are going to hear from tonight, talk a little bit about tax abatements, and then I'm gonna actually turn it over to the experts who do this work daily. So again, I'm David Howell. You're gonna hear from Casey Jackson, who is our senior real estate manager and is the senior real estate manager on our team. And she kind of coordinates this entire effort and just has been a wonderful job, done a wonderful job in just coordinating this effort. And she's going to talk about what tax abatements are, what they are not, why they're important, and how the average everyday citizen, if you will, include myself, I live in the city of Detroit, I own a home, how we can take advantage of what's available to the citizens of this city with respect to lowering their taxes. We got David White here, and David White is our Vice President of Business Development. David and his team pound the pavement around the country, marketing Detroit and telling people all over the country, in the world, in fact, why you should come open up your business in Detroit. Him and his team engage the business owners who are in Detroit in terms of how we can help you expand your businesses too. Cora Kapler, who's our senior Brownfield redevelopment manager, is going to talk to you about Brownfield plans, what they are, what they're not, and how they help development, how they help spur development in the city of Detroit. And then we've got Abdul, who is our associate director of Detroit Business Liaison, and he is going to talk to you about what him and his team do to effectuate business and economic growth and expansion in the city of Detroit. So again, our team is from DEGC, and that stands for Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, and we are the lead economic development agency in the city of Detroit. We were formed in 1978. Our late, great Coleman Young saw fit for an agency separate and distinct from the city, that works in concert with the city, that has its own board of directors. And he felt that it was necessary to establish an organization like that to, again, help foster economic growth and development. So we work with, we work in primarily three areas. One, real estate, and I have the privilege of leading that entity, if you will, or that division. And what we do is we engage with real estate developers, and we help get projects over the finish line. We underwrite all the tax abatement requests that come into the city of Detroit, and we got an excellent team that actually gets very involved and granular in looking and crunching numbers to make sure that all of the tax abatement requests that we receive meet the statutory guidelines as well as they meet our underwriting guidelines. Underwriting is much like what happens at a bank. If you're applying for a loan, you've got a loan officer who asks you a bunch of questions about your personal finances, and so we act similarly. And you know, you're gonna hear from David White. Again, David and his group pound the pavement to attract business here in the city of Detroit. And then we have a very robust and active small business unit or division that supports the small business community in the city of Detroit. One of the most popular programs, if you will, is Motor City Match, and I'm sure you're familiar with that, and that is managed by our small business support folks. There we go. Okay. So part of my role is to educate folks in the community, along with Casey, as well as our legislative leaders here locally and statewide, on facts, and in the community as well. Just the facts associated with tax abatements. And one of the misnomers, or one of the things that or kind of misconceptions, if you will, is that we pick winners and losers. And that couldn't be further from the truth. We do not pick who gets a tax abatement. What we do is we review all of the tax abatement requests that come into DEGC on behalf of the city. We do a ton of analysis, and if we determine if a tax abatement meets the statutory requirements, and B, it meets our underwriting criteria, we then present the recommendation to City Council, and that is our role. We do not create policy. Within the policy, we have certain responsibilities that, in my opinion, we carry out very well. And so, again, we don't pick winners and losers, we analyze a request. Another misconception is that tax abatements are for the wealthy only, and they only benefit downtown, and they are only applied to your big mammoth projects, because that's what you see in the paper. But the truth of the matter is 54%. So over 2022 and 2023, 54% excuse me, of the tax abatements were granted to developers and businesses outside downtown, outside Midtown, and outside Corktown. So that's those three areas make up the center city core, if you will, in the majority of tax abatements that we recommend to City Council are outside of those areas. So what does that say? That says development is moving into the neighborhoods, and the majority of the tax abatement requests that we analyze and recommend to City Council are outside of downtown. 38% of them, nearly 40%, are from developers of color. So, again, it's not Dan Gilbert and wealthy developers that are the only ones getting tax abatements. There are developers that look like a lot of you and I, and again, they're occurring in the neighborhoods. So the average size project of projects outside of downtown or midtown are almost $7 million. So it's nice sized projects that are happening along the Livernois corridor, along the East Warren corridor in Southwest Detroit and East English Village. In the average project size of African American developers over this 2-year period is nearly $27 million. So just quite candidly, black folks are doing some big deals in the city of Detroit. And we're very proud to be a part of fostering growth and development, again, in the city, out in the neighborhoods, and effectuated by African American developers.
Good evening. I'm Casey, and we're going to start at the very beginning in the basics of what taxes are, how they're calculated, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. So we're going to start at the basics. What is a millage rate? And so a millage rate is what is used in order to calculate property taxes. So it is the rate at which a property taxes are levied on a property. So a mill is 1/1000th of a dollar. Property taxes are computed by multiplying the taxable value of the property by the number of mills levied. So I kind of just want to go through what the millage rate is in the city of Detroit. And so on this screen, you'll see that we have the description of the different mills that are collected, and then we have the millage rate for homestead residents and then for businesses which are non-homestead. And you can see that for residents, the millage rate is 67.3108, and for non-businesses, they're 83.9137. And so I kind of want to put that into context for you. So we can go to the next slide. To compare for you was where we stand in a study that was done through the Lincoln Institute of how we ranked up against other cities. They did a national study, and Detroit ranked in the top 4 for both commercial and also residential rates. We were not the highest in the most recent study, but we still were in the top. So David mentioned it before, Councilmember Benson mentioned it before as well, that tax abatements are created under state law. That's not anything that's done in the city. That happens at a state level. And so what it does is it ultimately lowers the cost for a property owner who owns the property, either through a reduction in the property tax or a reduction in the personal property tax. And for homeowners who take advantage of the tax incentives that are available to them, it does the same by reducing the property tax. So there are several different types of tax incentives that are offered through the city of Detroit. We do have tax incentives that support neighborhood development. We have tax incentives that help to support new businesses that may be wanting to come to the city of Detroit and open up shop. We have tax incentives that help to support businesses that might already be located in the city but want to expand. And then we do have a tax incentive that helps developers with the cost of cleaning up contaminated sites. And then last, there are tax incentives that help to support home ownership. And we'll be talking about that. And we actually have someone from the city who's going to give you more information about that as well. So the question is, why we need tax incentives to help spur economic growth. And so the slide that I'm missing kind of laid out the fact that what I just gave you, the Lincoln Institute study shows that Detroit is in the top 4 for both commercial and residential effective property tax rates. So in order to make Detroit competitive, we have to use tax abatements in order to be competitive in attracting those businesses to the city and to do business here. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen an increase in construction costs, and so we use tax incentives to help offset that cost. And then it also puts us in a position, or the developers in a position, to be able to take buildings that have been sitting vacant for some time and turn those back into productive use. So you no longer have blighted structures sitting within your neighborhood commercial corridors. And we also, through tax incentives, are able to leverage the tax incentive to encourage developers to bring more affordable units to those new developments that you're seeing in your neighborhoods and throughout the city. And then lastly, doing development in Detroit is expensive and it can be very difficult to do. And so when you speak of like bringing retail to the neighborhoods, you're able to do that through those mixed use projects with residential and commercial. So David kind of went over this too, that we often hear that there are some concerns that residents have about tax incentives and what will actually happen if a developer receives a tax incentive within their neighborhood. So we hear all the time, people think their property taxes are going to go up. That's false. We hear that abatements take away money from the city. That is false, and we'll show you that it actually adds money to the general fund. We hear that companies get tax abatements without having to show us why they need it. That is absolutely false. And then lastly, once a company is given a tax abatement, that there's no accountability, and that is false as well. So we'll go through all of the different mechanisms that are in place that a developer has to pretty much abide by in order to remain in good standing with the city and keep their tax incentive. So I mentioned this before, tax incentives are available for businesses that want to come here, businesses that are expanding, developers who are taking existing structures and bringing them back online. Tax incentives are available for vacant land that developers or companies want to build brand new on. And then lastly, there are tax incentives for homeowners to take advantage of as well. Okay, and so I'm going to bring up Mr. Donwell from the city to break down what incentives are available for homeowners.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to see all these smiling faces out here today. You know, the one thing I love about this city is that regardless of what other people may say, we show up and we show out. So it is great, great, great to see you all here. My name is Willie Donwell. I'm the Director of the Property Assessment Board of Review, and I am going to talk to you about incentives that's available for homeowners. One of the things that we love to talk about is our homes and how we maintain them and how we keep them up. And actually, sometimes we do need help. But the reality is we got to start from the beginning. Number one, we know we're going to get taxed. We know it. So I'm going to start before I get into the incentives. We should go through the process at least once to understand how our property is being taxed and go through the appeal process so you know how your property is being taxed and ultimately that bill is generated. Because some of the incentives that is involved with your property is involved in that process as well. You understanding how your property is being taxed. So let's just start with the fact that you own a home in the city. Principal residence exemption. It allows you the opportunity to see up to $18 per thousand removed from your property taxes. It's the school operating millage. In 1994, took effect in 95, Proposal A took effect. And what it did was it increased our sales tax from 4% to 6%, but it removed the school operating millage from homeowners. So that's how we got there. The benefit is to make sure that home ownership in the cities across the state of Michigan was to be more sustainable and to move or shift the tax collection for the schools through a different process. So again, the first incentive, principal residence exemption. If you're a homeowner and you look at your tax bill and it does not equate to a percentage relative to the amount of the home that you occupy, you want to file it with the local assessor. So if you have a single family home and it doesn't say 100% PRE, then you want to file it with the 2368, which is principal residence exemption affidavit. You want to file it with the local assessor. If it's a two family, then you should have a 50% exemption. Same thing with a four family. Anything over 4 units is probably commercial, but you still can ask to have a PRE applied to it. You just have to allow the assessor to come out and go through the property to determine how much you actually occupy as your principal residence. So again, that principal residence exemption is really, really important. Another incentive is the NEZ. There's actually 3 types. I'm going to talk more about the NEZ homestead, but for pretty much the new construction that I'm sure they're going to get into a little bit later, but there's the NEZ new and the NEZ rehab, which is again part of a separate process, but I'm going to talk about the NEZ homestead. So City Council actually elevated the number of communities that the NEZ homestead is available now in the city. It provides an opportunity for the homeowner to see the city debt and county debt cut in half. So what it will do is it will reduce your millage rate from about $67 per thousand down to about $58.50 per thousand. So it's a significant reduction. It lasts for up to 15 years. The last three, 13, 14, and 15, it increases incrementally till year 16, where it's back up to the full millage rate. But it's a very, very positive tax incentive for homeowners. Then we also have the disabled veterans exemption. Is that on here? Okay, well, I'm going to just quickly talk about disabled veterans, but again, it's another tax incentive. Actually, recently, in fall of 2023, Public Act 150 and 151 was implemented, which now allows a disabled veteran or the unremarried surviving spouse to allow the incentive to be permanent as long as they occupy the property. It also allows the unremarried surviving spouse to take that incentive to another property if they decide to move. So they only have to apply once, and now it remains on the property permanently as long as they remain in the property. All right, the last couple of things that I'm going to mention, and I'm going to sit down, is actually three things. So homestead property tax credit is associated with your taxes. It's associated with your income tax. So Michigan 1040 CR, you want to talk to your property tax preparer about your obligation as relates to your taxes overall, and they will work with you to determine how much of a refund, that's the key word, that you can see back from the state of Michigan based upon the calculation process that's used under the Michigan 1040 CR. But you actually do have an opportunity to get money back based upon the amount of taxes that you pay. But again, it's related not just to your homestead. Tenants actually see the benefit as well. There's a calculation process that if you are paying rent, you can actually get money back as well under the Michigan 1040 CR process. So it's a very, very, again, positive incentive. The actually HOPE and PAYS kind of connects together, and it's actually my favorite process to talk about. So HOPE stands for Homeowners Property Tax Exemption, and it is under, in accordance with Michigan MCL 2117U of the General Property Tax Act. It provides an opportunity for a homeowner to see a reduction or elimination of the current year property taxes. The benefit as it relates to PAYS, if you receive an exemption at any level, from the city of Detroit, that data is forwarded over to the Wayne County Treasurer. And if you have never been entered into the PAYS program, you'll be entered into the PAYS program based upon that eligibility, and your back taxes will be reduced to no more than 10% of the taxable value of the property. Let me give you a real world scenario. Young lady applied for HOPE, and unfortunately she didn't own the property at the time. The property was left with her by her deceased mother. We connected her with Michigan Legal Services and got her through the process to get the property in her name through probate. Once she got the property into her name, she did qualify for the HOPE exemption, $18,000 in back taxes, $18,000. So working at Burger King, you are not going to be able to pay that, right? The process reduced that $18,000 to $1,059. And the balance was paid off through the Detroit Tax Relief Fund, which was $15 million that we received as a grant from Dan Gilbert, the Gilbert Family Foundation, to pay off back taxes for homeowners who got through the process. The city of Detroit does not administer that money. It is administered through the Detroit Tax Relief Fund that is controlled by Wayne Metro. We work through it through a very, very far arm's length process where they account for their own money in whatever process. We just process the applications and make sure that those individuals that are qualified get through the process with the Wayne County Treasurer to make them eligible for the PAYS program. So we work very, very closely with homeowners on an ongoing basis. As a matter of fact, just to share with you, we have information here as well. We've been doing a series of what's called Healthy Homes events, and these Healthy Home events provide opportunities for homeowners to come in and get access to these incentives. We do them in every district, and we've been doing them in every district over the past couple of years. We have one coming up on the October the 26th at Perfecting. And actually, we're specifically looking to assist seniors and individuals with disabilities that day. So we are also connected with DAAA and Disabilities Network of Wayne County and Detroit, because we are trying to make sure that individuals who have rights to these incentives have access. Everyone needs to have access, and we're doing everything possible to make sure that they have access, because we are working in concert, again, with the Wayne County Treasurer, our state legislators, and the city to provide access. So the last thing I'm going to mention, I'm going to sit down, besides the assisting with property taxes, these resources that we're connecting the dots on are water affordability, utility assistance, food and clothing, and other assistance that a person needs to, quote unquote, have a healthy home. So the idea is that we are taking from the ground up the idea of these incentives and broadening it into the household itself to make sure that people have what they need to be able to survive in our communities. So that's our goal, that's our purpose, and thank you for giving me a few minutes to talk to you.
Okay, my name is Cora Kapler. I'm the Brownfield Redevelopment Manager at the DEGC and for the Detroit Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. I know that we are a little bit pressed on time. We want to leave time for question and answer. So I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly, but hopefully it's clear. So I'm going to talk about the Brownfield Tax Increment Financing, or TIF, which is through Public Act 381. It functions a little bit differently than a tax abatement. So a tax abatement you can think of as a coupon or like a promotional period on your future taxes. Brownfield tax increment financing functions almost more like a mail-in rebate, where you pay the cost up front and then you're reimbursed a portion of that later on when you submit your documents. So this is a chart that really simplifies how tax increment financing works. So if you say you own a piece of vacant land, you're paying $1,000 a year, just to keep it a simple number for myself. You're paying $1,000 a year and you decide, I want to build on this property. So you come to us for a brownfield plan. At the time that your brownfield plan is approved, that becomes what's known as your base taxable value. So that $1,000, you'll continue to pay it into the future, but that becomes what's known as the base taxable value for your TIF. So you complete your project, your property is then reassessed, so your taxes go up. And so that's shown by this yellow triangle. So a portion of that increase in taxes is then captured by the Brownfield Authority and then reimbursed to you for certain eligible costs that you had to pay as part of your project for a certain period of time, up to 30 years, or by the time that you're fully reimbursed, whichever occurs first. And then after that plan is completed, the full taxes on the property then go to all taxing jurisdictions. So I covered a little bit of this information. So the developer pays for all eligible activities under the Act upfront as part of their development costs. They then submit all documentation for those costs to the DBRA. We review those costs for eligibility under the Act, reasonableness for the costs, and we ensure the project is compliant with all applicable city, state, and federal regulations. So if they're subject to executive orders, we make sure that we get a clearance letter from CREO, who has been monitoring the project, before any reimbursement takes place. Again, and then the developer is reimbursed for those costs over a period of time, a maximum of 30 years. So there are some millages that are eligible to be captured under a brownfield plan, and there are some that are not. So capturable millages include city operating, the Wayne County millages, Huron-Clinton Metropolitan Authority millages, RISA, school operating, and state equalization tax millages. It's important to note that school operating millages and the SET, they're only eligible to be captured under a brownfield plan if the plan is approved by the state. Some non-capturable millages are city debt, school debt, DIA, and zoo. So that increase in property taxes for those millages are not captured under a brownfield plan. Those go to those taxing jurisdictions. So it's only the increase in property taxes generated and paid on a property included in a brownfield plan that are eligible to be captured. So the application process for a brownfield plan is sort of similar to an abatement, but it is different in some ways. The DBRA does have a board of directors that reviews all plans. We also have a community advisory committee that reviews all plans. Should they recommend approval to City Council, it'll then be submitted to Detroit City Council, where a public hearing is held at Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee. They provide their recommendation to the full City Council, and then it is then considered at formal session for approval. Should the full City Council approve the plan, it is then approved for the capture of local taxes only. And then the developer would then need to get state approval from either the Michigan Strategic Fund or the Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy Department for those costs.
There were some misconceptions that once the developer got a tax incentive, that they were just clear to go. There was no accountability. So what we're going to walk through is how the city actually holds a developer accountable. So once a tax incentive has been approved through the City Council process, the developer or the company will sign a legally binding document between the City of Detroit's law department and their entity that is receiving the tax incentive, and they commit to a certain amount of money that they're going to invest. They commit to a certain amount of jobs that they're going to produce as a result of that development, and they also commit to a certain timeline. So if they don't keep those things in order, the city has the right and a mechanism that allows them to cancel the abatement. And so there's actually a recapture clause also that will allow the city to recapture the taxes for a certain period of time. Another form of accountability on some of the larger projects is there is a citizen participation process, and that's known through the Community Benefits Ordinance. And so some projects qualify for that. The smaller projects don't, but the larger projects you guys are probably very familiar with, those have gone through a CBO process. Okay, so I want to walk you through how a tax incentive works and how it brings money into the city. So on this slide, on the far left, you'll see that we're going to say a property generates about $15,000 in taxes with no development, no project. It just generates that amount of money. When a developer comes in and they invest a certain amount of money, as a result of them making that investment, the assessor's office is going to reassess that property. And as a result of their investment, the property taxes are going to increase. And so to the right of that no project sign, you'll see that in this scenario, you have a $15,000 that the developer was paying already. As a result of their investment, property taxes increase an additional $75,000. What a tax incentive does is it abates a portion of that increase. So the developer does not pay the full portion, they pay a small increase. And so you'll see, moving over to the right, the tax revenue to the city. With the project, the city now sees $35,000 annually in income or revenue, property tax revenue. And without the project, the city only saw $15,000. So there is a $20,000 gain as a result of that project being developed to the city. So speaking of how tax incentives benefit the city, not only through the property tax revenue, you see the property taxes increase, both personal and real property. Then you have increase in income taxes as a result of the jobs that are created from that development. And so once you take a look at what the incentive costs, you look at the costs associated with that incentive, overall, what the tax incentive and the development do is that there's an increase to the city's revenue and the city's jobs. So David kind of touched on this before, that developers don't just come to DEGC and say, I need a tax incentive, and we sign off on it. A developer actually goes through a very intensive process with DEGC in order to find out, one, if they qualify for an incentive, if their project needs it, and then two, how long does the project need it for? And so what we do is we have them submit financial information for the project so we can understand what the costs are, we can understand what they're charging for rent, and we can look and see if those align with what we're seeing throughout the city. And then we basically stress test the deal. So we look and see, without this incentive, can the bank or can the developer pay back the bank? And if we determine no, then we look and see how long we need to incentivize the project in order for the developer to be able to repay their loans. We also look at the overall economic benefit of the project. Is it going to bring jobs to the city of Detroit? Is it going to bring opportunity in the neighborhoods for the city of Detroit? And then we look at the fiscal benefit. A project will not receive a tax incentive if overall there is no net positive benefit to the city of Detroit. So if a project is being proposed and there's not any money coming to the city, we don't support or recommend that to council to support for a tax incentive. And then lastly, we look at if the project aligns with the overall master plan for the city. Does it fit the neighborhood framework plan? Does it activate the commercial corridor within that neighborhood? And if all of those things are met, then we make that recommendation to city council that that project deserves a tax incentive. The process that a developer goes through when they apply for a tax incentive is they actually apply, it's a two-step process. Let me back up. It's a two-step process. So a developer has to request to establish a district, and the district is actually what allows the developer to begin construction without being penalized. And then they have to apply for a certificate. So the district does not abate the taxes. It is that second step that actually gives that tax benefit. So the developer will apply for the district with the City of Detroit's clerk's office, and then they will apply for the certificate. Then we go through that process that I just told you about, underwriting with DEGC. At the same time that we're doing that, there are a number of departments within the city that review the request, and then the project goes to the City of Detroit's Legislative Policy Division. In preparation for City Council, there is a legal agreement that is drawn up, and if the project goes to committee, Planning and Economic Development Committee, and is supported at committee, it is then recommended to City Council, and if Council of the Whole approves it, then it will go to the state. And at the end of the day, the state has the final say, not Detroit. The state will say yes or no, and then if they support it, then the developer will see that benefit once they complete that project. So I'm going to go through some of the tax incentives that are used for neighborhood development, and if you've attended a Planning and Economic Development Committee meeting, you probably are familiar with some of these terms. But the first one that's on here is a Commercial Rehabilitation Act. That's known as a PA 210. Statutorily, it can be given for up to 10 years, and that is used for commercial property. It also can be used for ground up new construction residential. It's used for qualified retail food establishments, and that one is up for 10 years. The next one is the OPRA, the PA 146. That is for existing structures, and that is up for 12 years. And so you'll hear a lot of that when we come to the table for like neighborhood development. So the properties on the commercial corridors that are being reactivated, a lot of developers utilize this. Then we have the Neighborhood Enterprise Zone Act, that's the PA 147. Mr. Don Will talked about the homestead. What we evaluate for is the new and rehabilitation, and that can last for up to 15 years. And then lastly, there's the PA 255, which is the Commercial Facilities Exemption Act, and that one lasts for up to 12 years, and it's used to incentivize mixed-use development in qualified downtown revitalization districts. So I want to walk you through a deal that is actually now completed, and it is the Brook at Bagley. And so this is a project that was led by Cliff Brown, and the project is a mixed-use project, and so it has 78 units of residential, of which you have 20% at affordable, 80% AMI or below, and then you have 2,000 square feet of retail space. And so I want to walk you through the capital stack, and the capital stack is basically all of the sources that a developer has to use in order to get a deal done. So it's not like you go to the bank, you get one loan, and then you're done. It takes several sources to get deals done in the city of Detroit. So the developer, for a $23 million project, was able to secure in debt almost $16 million, and that represents 69% of the sources. And then I've got a section that's highlighted that says CRP and grants, almost $5 million. this is subsidy that is used through like MEDC, Community Revitalization Program, and various grants in order to make up that gap. So what's highlighted was the gap that the developer had. So he could only get $16 million from the bank, and then he raised $2.17 million and still had the $4.8 million gap. And so he had to get that subsidized. And so that's 21% of the deal. And so what we look at is when we evaluate for the tax incentive, the bank typically likes to get $1.20 for every dollar that they lend. And so we're looking to see, without a tax incentive, can the developer pay back the bank what they require? And if they can't, then we put the tax incentive in to see if we can get to the level that the bank requires. And so on this, without the tax incentive, without the Brownfield, and Cora will talk to you about that, the bank requires $1.20. The developer is only producing $1.14. So he's below what they're asking for. With a tax incentive, the developer is able to meet the criteria that the bank has set in order to pay back that debt. So the tax incentive was absolutely necessary for the developer to secure the funds in order to be able to do this project. And now I'm going to bring up my colleague, Mr. David White.
Good to be here. My name is David White. I lead the business development team for the DEGC. And what is business development? Business development is two things: business attraction, but also business retention and expansion. So our team are the ones who are out traveling with the MEDC, with the Detroit Regional Partnership, or on our own to talk to larger scale corporate investors to convince them to locate their investments in the city of Detroit. So think larger scale manufacturing, R&D centers, office operations. That's the province of our team in business development. We also go out into the community for our existing Detroit businesses, our existing large scale Detroit businesses, and help them to expand. Oftentimes those companies have competitive projects where they could expand in the city of Detroit, or they could expand in a competing location. We help them to do that, and tax incentives are used on our team to fill a competitive gap. So we need to see in our team that there's a competition between the city of Detroit and a less costly competing location, that the tax incentives are needed to fill that cost gap. And that is basically the underwriting analysis that our team undertakes. Do the incentives fill a competitive gap with a project that could locate in a less costly location? So the three programs that we typically use, first of all, the Industrial Facilities Exemption, or PA 198. That program provides a real property tax incentive for the rehabilitation or new construction of manufacturing and industrial properties. So typically manufacturers and R&D centers would utilize this program. The abatement term is up to 12 years. If it's a lease, that term is capped at the term of the lease. You cannot go longer than the term of the lease. There's actually two types of that incentive. The first is a rehab, and it's 100% exemption for the new investment that's made as a result of the project. And there's also a new construction abatement, which is a 50% tax abatement, again, up 12 years. The second program is called the New Personal Property Tax Exemption. This program currently is only used mainly for office operations because in the state of Michigan, movable personal property, manufacturing equipment, furniture and fixtures, if it's part of a manufacturing operation, it's currently exempt by state statute by right. So we don't have to provide a tax incentive for those opportunities. The only remaining personal property, movable personal property that is still taxed under state law is office operations. So if we happen to have an office operation, we don't have a whole lot of those post-COVID, not a lot of activity in the office market, obviously. We would use this program. The term is capped at the term of a lease, which is typically the case in office operations. And again, the incentive is an exemption, 100% exemption for the personal property tax on movable furniture and fixtures, machinery and equipment for office operations. Lastly, the Next Michigan Development Act. This is a Next Michigan Development Corporation Renaissance Zone. A little more aggressive tax incentive. We've only used it, I believe, twice in the city so far. It's an incentive to spur development for larger scale manufacturing users. There must be 2 or more modes of transportation involved in the supply chain by statute for us to utilize this program. The term is up to 10 years. It exempts real property tax, city corporate income tax, city utility users tax. There are other taxes that it abates, but now under state law, those are exempt, like manufacturing personal property. So those are the 3 main programs that we utilize in business development. Next slide, Cora. So I wanted to just quickly take you through a sample competitive project that actually ended up landing in the city of Detroit. So this project, the company comes to us. They're seeking to do new construction of a 300,000 square foot automotive manufacturing facility. Their costs are around $40 million up front to develop the project, create a little over 400 jobs, but there's a competition. They're looking at a site that ended up being the former Kettering High School site in the city of Detroit, previously owned by Detroit Public Schools, so a publicly owned site. But they also had an opportunity in Ohio to locate that operation. And as it turns out, the Ohio opportunity was significantly less costly for them. And we've kind of lined up Detroit versus Toledo, Ohio, 12-year costs. Some of these are provided by the companies, which we validate. Some of these are provided by DEGC through our existing research team. But you can see property taxes, less costly in Toledo for this operation. In this case, the company had to build a facility in the city of Detroit on a vacant site. In Toledo, they were going to lease an existing building, so their building costs were lower. Wage costs in Detroit are higher than in Toledo. We're a larger metropolis. We pay folks more in Detroit than we do in Toledo in general for this type of operation. However, the company's customer was located in the Detroit region. So the logistics costs were significantly higher in Toledo for them to ship their goods to the Detroit area to their customers. So that was a positive on the Detroit side of the ledger. There are some additional costs there, which I won't go through, but in the end, add it all up, the gap between Detroit and Ohio was approximately $23 million without incentives. We don't win that deal unless we provide an incentive to help fill that gap and make Detroit competitive with Toledo to win that deal. So next slide. So as a result, the end result of this project, after providing incentives, was the Dakota Integrated Systems sequencing plant located at the former Kettering High School site. We used the Renaissance Zone program, the Industrial Facilities Exemption, and Brownfield TIF. We had to layer all 3 of those together to end up providing the benefit to Kettering to help to fill that $23 million gap. Despite that, providing that incentive through the underwriting in the city that we conduct at DEGC, there ends up being a net benefit to the city of Detroit of $22 million, which we must validate as part of the process in addition to filling the gap. And Dakota ended up creating 700 jobs on the site. 80% of those are Detroit residents. And that publicly owned parcel is now back on the tax rolls, creating tax dollars for the city. And there's 10 or so acres to the north that is now much more marketable to the city. It's publicly owned because there's a great user on that southern end. In addition, Detroit Public Schools received $2.6 million to sell the land to the company. And we've got a long-term manufacturing operator paying taxes, hiring Detroiters at that site. And we're now going after trying to land, who do we land on that northern end of that property? So that's kind of just a good example of how we use tax incentives to land business attraction deals in the city of Detroit. Thanks a lot. Happy to answer questions later.